Naomi had almost reached the ballroom doors when her cousin's voice cut through the music. "Wait," Vanessa called, lifting her champagne glass high enough to silence nearby conversations. "You can't leave before everyone meets my favorite cousin." Dozens of smiling faces turned toward Naomi. Her 8-year-old son, Ethan, tightened his grip around her hand. Vanessa's smile widened. "This," she announced, pointing directly at Naomi, "is my divorced cousin, the broke single mom I told you all about." A wave of laughter rolled across the reception hall. Naomi felt every eye settle on her. Before she could answer, Aunt Margaret leaned back in her chair, laughing loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Anyone here want to take her home?" she joked. "She probably couldn't even afford the taxi." The laughter became louder. Someone actually clapped. Ethan looked up at his mother. "Mom." She squeezed his hand before he could ask the question already forming in his eyes. "It's okay," she whispered. It wasn't. Naomi lowered her head and forced herself to smile, determined not to cry in front of her son. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's go." She had taken only 2 steps when a chair scraped sharply against the polished floor. The sound echoed across the ballroom. The groom had stood up. Daniel walked away from the head table. He passed the wedding cake. He passed the bridal party. He walked straight past Vanessa without saying a single word. Every conversation stopped. People assumed he was about to apologize for his bride's terrible joke. Instead, Daniel stopped in front of Ethan. He slowly knelt until he was eye level with the little boy. Then he gently took Ethan's hand. He looked up at Naomi. "I will." The ballroom fell into complete silence. Vanessa let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, that's funny," she said. "You almost scared me." Daniel didn't even look at her. His eyes remained on Naomi. "Please," he said quietly, "don't leave yet." Naomi couldn't move. She searched Daniel's face, convinced she had misunderstood him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Do we know each other?" Daniel gave the smallest shake of his head. "Not the way you think." Around them, whispers spread from table to table. "What is he doing? Is this some kind of prank? Did they plan this?" Vanessa stepped forward, forcing a smile that no longer looked convincing. "Daniel," she laughed, reaching for his arm, everyone staring. He gently moved his arm away. The movement was small. The impact was enormous. The smile disappeared from Vanessa's face. Aunt Margaret stood so quickly that her chair nearly tipped over. "Daniel," she snapped, "this isn't the time to entertain family drama." Naomi wanted nothing more than to disappear. She had spent years becoming invisible whenever her relatives mocked her. Ever since her divorce, every family gathering followed the same pattern. Someone joked about her old apartment. Someone mentioned her second job. Someone asked whether Ethan's father had finally remembered he had a son. If Naomi stayed silent, they laughed. If she defended herself, they called her bitter. So she had learned to endure it. Not for herself. For Ethan. She never wanted him growing up surrounded by shouting and arguments. But tonight felt different. Daniel wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't angry in the reckless way people became during weddings. He looked prepared. Almost relieved. As if he had been waiting for this exact moment. Vanessa finally walked directly between Daniel and Naomi. "What are you doing?" she demanded through clenched teeth. Daniel remained calm, giving someone the respect she should have received a long time ago. The room became even quieter. Naomi stared at him, her heart racing. How could a man she barely knew speak, as though he understood years of pain nobody else had ever acknowledged? Then Daniel looked directly into her eyes and said words that made her forget the laughter, the insults, and even the wedding around her. "Naomi, do you remember meeting a frightened young man outside a community center almost 10 years ago?" The question hung in the silent ballroom. Naomi blinked, searching Daniel's face. A community center, she repeated quietly. I'm sorry, I don't. Vanessa threw her hands into the air. Oh, for goodness sake, she snapped. Can we stop pretending this is some romantic movie? Daniel, you're humiliating me. She reached for his arm again. This time, he stepped aside before she could touch him. I'm speaking to Naomi, he said calmly. His voice wasn't angry. That somehow made it even more unsettling. Naomi frowned. I really don't remember. Daniel nodded, as though he'd expected that answer. You wouldn't, he replied, because to you it was one ordinary evening. His words pulled Naomi backward through years she hadn't thought about in a long time. Nearly 10 years earlier, rain had poured relentlessly onto the cracked sidewalks outside the neighborhood community center. Naomi was 23. Her husband had already abandoned the marriage. Her divorce papers had just been filed. She was raising 6-month-old Ethan alone while juggling 2 part-time jobs. Every dollar mattered. Every hour mattered. She had rushed out of the building carrying donated baby supplies when she noticed a young man sitting on the curb. His soaked dress shirt clung to his shoulders. A folder full of papers rested beside him, protected beneath his jacket. He looked completely defeated. Naomi had hesitated. She barely had enough money to buy groceries that week. Yet something about the stranger made her stop. Are you okay? She had asked. The young man forced a tired smile. I've just been rejected again. For a job. For everything. He explained that his family's small manufacturing business was collapsing. Banks had refused another loan. Investors weren't interested. He had spent months trying to save the company his late father built. That afternoon had been his last meeting. It had failed. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now, he admitted. Naomi had looked down at the baby, sleeping peacefully in his stroller. Then back at the exhausted stranger. She reached into her purse. Inside was the cash she had withdrawn to cover groceries until payday. She separated a few bills and handed them to him. He immediately shook his head. No, I can't take your money. It's not much, Naomi had said with a smile, but you need dinner more than I do tonight. Then she scribbled the name of a nonprofit business development program onto the back of a receipt. They helped my old supervisor start her bakery. They don't advertise much. Call them tomorrow. The stranger stared at the paper. You don't even know me. Naomi shrugged. I don't have to. She picked up Ethan's stroller and started walking away. He called after her. What's your name? She smiled without turning around. Just promise me you'll keep trying. That was all. She never saw him again. Or so she believed. The ballroom slowly came back into focus. Naomi covered her mouth. Her eyes widened. You, she whispered. Daniel smiled sadly. I called that nonprofit the next morning. Around the room, guests exchanged confused glances. He continued. They connected me with mentors, emergency financing, and legal advisors. My family's company survived because of that phone call. Naomi shook her head. I didn't save anyone. You changed the direction of my life, Daniel answered. Vanessa folded her arms. So that's it, she scoffed. She gave you charity once. Wonderful, can we please move on? Daniel didn't even acknowledge the interruption. Instead, he looked back at Naomi. When Vanessa introduced me to her family months ago, I recognized your name immediately. Naomi frowned. You knew. I wasn't completely certain until I saw you. He paused. I expected the woman who came from the same family as the person who helped me would share those values. His eyes slowly drifted toward Vanessa. I was wrong. The ballroom remained silent. Daniel continued, his voice measured. Every family dinner, every birthday, every holiday. He looked around the room. I watched people mock you. Naomi lowered her eyes. Daniel continued. I kept waiting for Vanessa to stop it. He glanced toward his fiancée. I kept believing the next gathering would be different. Vanessa's confident expression began to crack. I thought she'd defend her own cousin. He let the words settle over the room. But she never did. Naomi suddenly realized this had nothing to do with a single cruel joke at the wedding. Daniel hadn't stood up because of one humiliating moment. He had been silently watching months of them. He had given Vanessa every opportunity to choose compassion. She had chosen cruelty instead. Daniel looked directly at the stunned bride. Then, with complete calm, he said the sentence that made the entire room hold its breath. What happened tonight wasn't the reason I stood up. He paused. It was simply the final proof. A heavy silence settled over the ballroom. For several long seconds, no one moved. Then Vanessa let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. You've got to be kidding me. She walked straight toward Daniel, her wedding dress brushing across the polished floor. So you're turning my wedding into a tribute to my cousin, because she bought you dinner 10 years ago. Daniel met her eyes without flinching. No. Then what is this? She demanded. Because right now you're destroying the happiest day of my life. Before he could answer, Aunt Margaret marched to the center of the room. This is Naomi's doing, she declared, pointing an accusing finger. She's always been jealous of Vanessa. She must have filled your head with lies. Naomi took an instinctive step backward. I haven't spoken to Daniel outside of family dinners, she said quietly. I never asked him to. Oh, stop pretending, Aunt Margaret snapped. You've wanted attention your entire life. Murmurs spread through the guests. Some nodded. Others looked uncertain. For the first time, a few people weren't laughing. They were watching. Daniel turned toward the wedding coordinator. Would you pause the ceremony, please? The coordinator hesitated, glancing nervously between the bride and groom. Sir, I'll take full responsibility. The officiant slowly stepped away from the altar. The musicians lowered their instruments. Even the waitstaff stopped serving drinks. The ballroom became eerily still. Daniel accepted a wireless microphone from the coordinator. I owe everyone here an explanation before this ceremony goes any further. Vanessa folded her arms. You owe me one. I do, Daniel replied calmly, and everyone else deserves the truth. He slowly faced the guests. When Vanessa and I became engaged, I believed we shared the same values. He paused. She often told me how much she loved helping people. Several guests smiled, remembering the stories. Daniel continued. She said she quietly supported struggling relatives because family should never be abandoned. Naomi looked up in surprise. Vanessa had told people that. Daniel nodded toward a man seated near the back of the room. My attorney verified those claims several weeks ago. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Vanessa's expression hardened. You hired someone to investigate me. I hired someone because too many stories didn't add up. Aunt Margaret scoffed. That's ridiculous. Is it? Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and removed several neatly organized documents. I was told Vanessa regularly paid relatives rent, covered medical bills, and helped family members through difficult times. He looked directly at Naomi. But one relative kept working 2 jobs, raising her son alone, while being ridiculed for struggling. The room grew quieter. Daniel lifted the papers. The financial records tell a very different story. Vanessa's confidence faltered for the first time. They're private. They're voluntarily disclosed records, used to support the charitable foundation you claim to operate. A few guests exchanged confused looks. Daniel continued. There were donations. He paused, but not to struggling relatives. He looked toward Naomi again. There wasn't a single payment made to help her. Vanessa's jaw tightened. I don't owe her anything. No, Daniel agreed. You don't. The simplicity of his answer caught everyone off guard. You owe honesty. He walked toward the large projection screen that had been displaying engagement photos all evening. I also learned something else. The technician looked uncertain. Daniel nodded. Please display the file I emailed you earlier. Vanessa's eyes widened. What file? The slideshow disappeared. In its place appeared screenshots of text messages, one after another. The ballroom fell silent as guests began reading. Vanessa, *, don't invite Naomi. She'll make the family look pathetic. Vanessa, *, no man wants a divorced single mom sitting in wedding photos. Another screenshot appeared. Vanessa, * people like her choose miserable lives. She'll only bring the mood down. A woman at the front table quietly covered her mouth. Someone whispered. She actually wrote that. More screenshots followed. Months. Years. Message after message mocking Naomi's apartment, her jobs, her divorce, even Ethan. The laughter that had filled the ballroom only minutes earlier had vanished completely. Several cousins lowered their heads. One of Vanessa's bridesmaids slowly stepped away from the bridal table. Unable to look at her, Naomi stared at the screen in disbelief. She had always suspected people talked behind her back. She had never imagined the cruelty was this deliberate. Aunt Margaret suddenly lunged toward Daniel. Turn that off. She reached for the microphone. Daniel stepped back before she could grab it. No. This is private family business. No, he said firmly. Private cruelty becomes public the moment it's celebrated in front of a room full of people. Vanessa finally found her voice. They were jokes. Daniel looked directly at her. The first cruel comment might be. He gestured toward the screen. Hundreds of them over several years become something entirely different. No one defended her. Not even the guests who had laughed moments earlier. The silence was answer enough. Daniel slowly removed the gold wedding band from his finger. He looked at it for a moment. Then he placed it gently on the head table, beside Vanessa's untouched bouquet. He lifted his eyes to meet hers. His voice remained calm. I'm still not finished. No one applauded. No one whispered. The ballroom had become so quiet that the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed impossibly loud. Only minutes earlier, guests had laughed at Naomi. Now many of those same people stared at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. Vanessa looked around the room in disbelief. Say something, she cried. Someone tell him he's gone too far. No one answered. Daniel folded the documents neatly and set them on the head table. I know what many of you are thinking, he said. You're wondering why I waited until today. He looked toward the officiant before turning back to the guests. I asked myself that same question every day for the past several weeks. Vanessa let out a bitter laugh. So you planned this? I planned to be certain. His voice remained steady. I wasn't willing to destroy a wedding because of rumors. He looked across the room. I verified every concern, every conversation, every claim. He paused, and I kept hoping I was wrong. Naomi watched him silently. He wasn't speaking with anger. He sounded disappointed. I thought perhaps I had misunderstood what I was seeing. His gaze shifted briefly toward Vanessa. I hoped that one day I'd watch you defend Naomi. Vanessa crossed her arms. I didn't have to defend her. No, Daniel replied. You were the one leading the attacks. A painful silence followed. Then something unexpected happened. A man near the back slowly stood. It was Vanessa's older cousin, Brian. He cleared his throat. He's telling the truth. Every head turned toward him. Brian looked ashamed. I've seen it for years. He looked directly at Naomi. I laugh sometimes. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. Another relative stood. I remember Thanksgiving, an older woman admitted quietly. Naomi brought all the food, and we still made jokes about her thrift store dress. Someone else spoke. I never said anything because I didn't want to upset Margaret. A fourth voice joined in. I should have stopped it. One confession became another. The room slowly filled with uncomfortable honesty. Naomi stood frozen. She had spent years believing no one noticed. The truth was somehow worse. They had noticed. They had simply chosen silence. A small hand tugged gently at her sleeve. She looked down. Ethan stared around the room with wide, confused eyes. Mom. She knelt beside him. Yes, sweetheart. Why is everybody crying? His innocent question echoed through the ballroom. Several guests lowered their heads. One bridesmaid quietly wiped away tears. Even the photographer looked away from his camera. Daniel swallowed before answering. They're realizing they hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Ethan looked at Naomi. But Mommy never hurts anybody. The words landed harder than any accusation. Aunt Margaret slowly sat back down. For the first time that evening, she had nothing to say. Daniel turned toward the officiant. You don't need to wait any longer. The officiant nodded solemnly. I understand. He quietly closed the ceremony book and stepped away from the altar. That single movement made everything real. The wedding was no longer delayed. It was ending. The string quartet quietly packed away their instruments. The florist began removing arrangements from the aisle. Two servers exchanged uncertain glances before carrying untouched champagne trays back toward the kitchen. The photographer lowered his camera and slipped the lens cap back into place. One by one, the professionals accepted what the family had not. There would be no wedding. Vanessa rushed toward Daniel. We can fix this. Her voice trembled now. We'll talk after everyone leaves. Daniel shook his head. No. You don't throw away a future over one mistake. He met her eyes. This wasn't one mistake. He gestured toward the projection screen. It was years of choices. She reached for his hands. He stepped back again. This conversation belongs in private. So did Naomi's humiliation, Daniel answered quietly. You chose to make that public. His words silenced her. Naomi stepped forward for the first time. Daniel. He turned toward her. You've done enough. Her voice was gentle. I don't want you throwing your future away because of me. Daniel smiled sadly. This isn't because of you. He glanced once more at Vanessa. It's because I finally understand who I was about to marry. He took a slow breath. I could forgive a bad decision. His eyes settled on the frozen bride. But I can't build a life with someone who enjoys making vulnerable people feel small. Around the ballroom, heads nodded. Not dramatically. Quietly. Honestly. The balance of power had shifted completely. Vanessa looked around desperately, searching for someone, anyone, to defend her. No one did. She turned toward her mother. Aunt Margaret, say something. Margaret opened her mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in years, authority had abandoned her. Vanessa's shoulders sagged. She realized the room no longer belonged to her. Daniel reached down beside his chair and lifted a slim leather folder. Its edges were worn from being opened many times. He held it carefully in both hands. His expression grew even more serious. I've shown everyone only part of what I learned. He looked around the silent ballroom. Then he opened the folder. Now everyone deserves to know the whole truth. Daniel slowly removed a single sheet of paper from the folder. He didn't rush. He wanted everyone to understand exactly why he had made the decision that would forever change this day. This, he said, holding up the document, is the first business proposal my company ever submitted after we received emergency funding. The guests looked at one another, confused. What does that have to do with any of this? Vanessa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel looked at her with quiet disappointment. Everything. He turned toward Naomi. 10 years ago, when everyone else saw a stranger who had failed, you saw someone worth helping. Naomi shook her head. I only gave you a phone number. You gave me hope. The ballroom fell silent again. I had spent months hearing that my father's company was finished. Every bank rejected us. Every investor walked away. I had reached the point where I believed giving up was the responsible thing to do. He smiled faintly. Then a young mother carrying grocery bags, she could barely afford, stopped to ask if I was okay. Naomi looked down, remembering the rain-soaked evening. You didn't know my name. Daniel nodded. You didn't ask what you would get in return. He looked around the room. You handed me the last cash you could spare, pointed me toward a nonprofit business development program, and told me to keep trying. He paused. I called them the next morning. Several guests leaned forward. They helped me restructure our debt, introduced me to mentors, and connected me with financing that kept our factory alive. He looked at Naomi again. Everything I have today started because one exhausted single mother refused to walk past someone who needed help. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. I never imagined. I know. Daniel smiled gently. That's exactly the point. He faced the guests once more. She never told anyone. The room remained still. She never asked for recognition. She never expected repayment. And she certainly never used that moment to make herself look important. His eyes slowly moved toward Vanessa. During our engagement, I often suggested helping relatives who were struggling. Vanessa stared at the floor. I specifically asked about Naomi. He reached into the folder again and removed another document. You told me she was lazy. Vanessa remained silent. You said she wasted every opportunity she had. Silence. You insisted helping her would only encourage failure. Daniel let the papers fall back into the folder. I believed you. His voice grew heavier. Until I recognized her. A quiet gasp spread through the room. After that first family dinner, I couldn't reconcile the woman I remembered with the woman you described. So I started paying attention. He looked around the ballroom. I watched every family gathering. I watched who interrupted Naomi, who laughed, who stayed silent. And every single time, she chose peace instead of revenge. Naomi lowered her head. She remembered every dinner she had quietly left early. Every birthday where she pretended not to hear the whispers. Every holiday where Ethan asked why nobody wanted to sit beside them. Daniel continued. I also kept hoping Vanessa would surprise me. He turned toward her. I thought maybe one day you'd tell everyone to stop. You never did. Vanessa's shoulders began to shake. She struggled to speak. I didn't think it was that serious. Daniel answered softly. It was serious to the little boy who heard adults laughing at his mother. Every eye turned toward Ethan. He stood quietly beside Naomi, still holding her hand. Without saying a word, he wrapped both arms around her waist. I love you, Mom. His small voice echoed through the ballroom. You're the nicest person I know. Naomi finally broke. Not because Daniel had defended her. Not because Vanessa had been exposed. But because, for the first time in years, her son had seen strangers stand up for what was right instead of joining the laughter. She knelt and hugged him tightly. I love you too. Several guests wiped away tears. Brian approached first. I'm sorry. Naomi looked up. He continued. I knew what was happening. I told myself it wasn't my business. I was wrong. Another cousin stepped forward. So was I. One after another, relatives quietly apologized. Some admitted they had laughed because everyone else laughed. Others confessed they had remained silent because challenging Aunt Margaret always caused arguments. None of those explanations sounded convincing anymore. Naomi accepted their apologies with quiet grace. I can't change the past, she said. But I hope none of you ever let another child watch someone they love get treated that way. No one argued. Aunt Margaret slowly stood. She walked toward Naomi with far less confidence than she had shown earlier. I thought making you tougher would prepare you for life. Naomi looked at her calmly. No. You taught everyone else that humiliating me was acceptable. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She nodded once. There was nothing she could say. Daniel turned toward the officiant. I'm sorry for today. The officiant smiled gently. Sometimes canceling a wedding is the most honest promise two people can make. Daniel nodded gratefully. Wedding staff quietly began dismantling the reception. The musicians packed away their instruments. Guests slowly left in silence. No celebration. No dancing. Only reflection. Within days, word of what had happened spread throughout the extended family. The screenshots Vanessa had dismissed as jokes reached relatives who had never attended the wedding. Many distanced themselves from her. Several close friends ended their relationships after learning how she had treated Naomi for years. Aunt Margaret found herself invited to fewer family gatherings than ever before. The authority she had once enjoyed disappeared almost overnight. No one wanted to encourage the behavior they had finally recognized. Daniel settled the wedding contracts according to their cancellation clauses, accepting the financial loss without complaint. It cost money, he later told a friend. Marrying the wrong person would have cost far more. As for Naomi, she returned to her everyday life. She continued working. She continued raising Ethan. The difference was no longer inside her bank account. It was inside her heart. She stopped apologizing for surviving. She stopped measuring herself against relatives who had never valued her. Months later, family gatherings looked very different. People greeted Naomi warmly. Not because she had become wealthy. Not because Daniel had defended her. But because the truth had finally stripped away years of false stories. Daniel and Naomi remained friends. Nothing more. Neither of them wanted their connection misunderstood. What bound them together wasn't romance. It was gratitude. One had offered kindness without expecting anything back. The other had refused to ignore injustice when it mattered most. Years later, Ethan would remember that wedding for only one reason. Not the flowers. Not the music. Not the arguments. He remembered the moment one person stood up while everyone else sat down. And because of that choice, the wedding everyone expected to celebrate became the day the truth finally chose its own bride.